Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya. Gopi Jana Vallabha Giribharatari Gopi Jana Vallabha Giribharatari Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashoda Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Banachari Yamuna Tira Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Giribharatari Gopi Jana Vallabha Giribharatari Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashoda Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Jai Nitya Vishnu Vishnu Pad Paramahamsa Parivraja Caitanya Ashtottara Sata Shri Srimad His Divine Grace Apai Charanada Vinda Bhaktivinoda Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki ISKCON BBD Founder Acharya Save the whole world Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Nitya Vishnu Vishnu Pad Paramahamsa Parivraja Caitanya Ashtottara Sata Shri Srimad His Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnavinda Ki Nama Charja Shri Rasta Ki Premzika Ho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai Nitai Gaur Premanandi all glories and warriors, all glories and warriors, all glories and warriors, all glories and warriors, glories to the Sri Guranga, all glories to Prabhupada Ki Jai. So what verse is it? What verse? No, that's not. Maharaj did 5 yesterday. At least my recollection of it was 5. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Okay, so Maitreya hang on a second, just skip there. Yada Swa Bharyaya Sardham Yada Swabaryaya Sardham Yada Swabaryaya Sardham Jata Swayambhuvo Manu Jata Swayambhuvo Manu Jata Swayambhuvo Manu Yadasa Bharyaya Sardham Jata Swayambhuvo Manu Panjali Pranatas Chedam Panjali Pranatas Chedam Pranjali Pranatas Chedam Veda Garbham Abhashata Veda Garbham Abhashata Veda Garbham Abhashata Pranjali Pranatas Chedam Veda Garbham Abhashata Maitreya Vacha Yadasa Bharyaya Sardham Jata Swayambhuvo Manu Pranjali Pranatas Chedam Veda Garbham Abhashata Maitreya Vacha Yadasa Bharyaya Sardham Jata Swayambhuvo Manu Pranjali Pranatas Chedam Veda Garbham Abhashata Maitreya Vacha Maitreya said, Yada, when Sabharyaya, along with his wife, Saradam, accompanied by Jata, appeared, Swayambhuva, Swayambhuva Manu, Manu, the father of mankind. Pranjali, with folded hands. Pranata, in obeisances. Cha, also. Idam, this. Veda Garbham, unto the reservoir of Vedic wisdom. Abhashata, addressed. So who's the reservoir of Vedic wisdom? Yeah, Brahma. That's who's being referred to. I mean, ultimately it's Krishna, because everything comes from Krishna. But in this sense, the conversation is going on between Brahma and Swayambhuva Manu. The sage Maitreya said to Vidura, after his appearance, Manu, the father of mankind, along with his wife, thus addressed the reservoir of Vedic wisdom, Brahma, with obeisances and folded hands, responsively. The sage Maitreya said to Vidura, after his appearance, Manu, the father of mankind, along with his wife, thus addressed the reservoir of Vedic wisdom, Brahma, with obeisances and folded hands. So it's quite significant. We see here the way that, and this is, you see this is quite common throughout the Bhagavatam and the Vedic text, is the dealings between juniors and superiors, and it's always one that's imbued with great respect and great reverence. And it's not that this is artificial, because Brahma is a great personality. He's actually the personality from, ultimately, as we understand in the Bhagavatam, the different topics, it's given this Shaga, this Vishaga. So Shaga means that ultimately everything's coming from Krishna. Aham savasya pravo, matta savam bhatate, iti mat bhajante, mam buddha bhavas manvata. That I am the source of all spiritual material worlds, Krishna explains, everything emanates from me. And Brahma, he takes, Brahma is the post of the secondary creator. So from Brahma, he manifests Krishna's creation in this world. It's already created by Krishna, but he manifests it in this world. And we see, so he's a great personality, but also he's performed great tapasya. Not that he's just, well, I've got the big post, therefore you should respect me. It's not like that. When he was, charged with the responsibility of creating the universe, he didn't know how to do it, so he sat down and meditated on his lotus, because he had nothing. He just had himself. He was sitting on the lotus. He didn't know where he came from. He didn't know who he was. Didn't know what his duty was. So he sat down and performed tapasya for, I think it was 1,000 years. And as a result of that tapasya, then he understood how to create. So he performed great austerity, and we see that he's possessed with many wonderful qualities. And so, therefore, we see here that Swayambhuva Manu is offering him respect. And also the way that Swayambhuva Manu manifested also, it helps us to understand Brahma's greatness as a servant of God. Because if you go back to the previous chapter, you'll see that Brahma, after his meditation, took on the task of creating the universe. So first off, he created, who was his first creation? Anyone remember? The 4 Kumaras. And so his purpose in creating was to populate the universe. That was his duty, was to populate the universe. But the Kumaras, what did they say? No, we're not doing that. We've got better things to do. And so Brahma, he became really frustrated, but not only did he become frustrated, he became quite angry. But he didn't express that anger. He understood anger is a lower quality, so he contained it within himself. But his anger was so powerful that it burst out from between his eyebrows and became Rudra, or Shiva. And we know that also Shiva, he didn't really get so much involved in procreation. He had, as far as I can recall, 2 sons, Kartikeya and Ganapati. Some people say Ayappa was also a son of Shiva, but that, according to Prabhupada, that's just speculation. This whole concept of Ayappa is just a concocted form, if you like. And it's kind of interesting, you can be in India, I can't remember what time of year it is, but once a year they have this festival for Ayappa, and you see these guys all over the country dressed in black and like a greyish silver kind of colour. The chaddars are greyish silver. And they go to, I can't remember where they go to, but you see them on the trains, you see them at the train station, you see them everywhere, just for a month or two. And then they disappear, you don't see them again. And so they're going for they have some festival there for Ayappa Baba. But as Prabhupada points out, this form of Ayappa is not an authorized form. So we don't accept him as being the son of Lord Shiva. Anyway, so Shiva had two sons, so he wasn't very much involved in filling the universe. He's actually, Shiva's position is quite different from ordinary progenitors. Anyhow, so Brahma, he was sitting down and he was reflecting on he was meditating on, here I am, I'm supposed to be filling the universe, but I'm actually not being very successful with this. And so he was reflecting on that, and as he was reflecting, these two forms came from his body, and this is Swayambhuva Manu and Shatarupa, and then it describes how they engaged in procreation, and actually they were very, very successful at it. From Swayambhuva Manu came Priyavrata, Uttanapad, Prasuti, Akuti, and Devahuti. So, and you'll see, like in this canto and the next, fourth canto, it talks about a lot of these descendants. Especially you see in the fourth canto, I think it's the fourth canto, there's a big discussion about Dhruva Maharaj and his brother Uttama, who were the sons of Uttanapad. And also we see there's, in this section also, there's the discussion about Kadama Muni, who was married to Devahuti, and their offspring was Kapila Deva. And so this whole section of the Bhagavatam is actually talking about these descendants of Swayambhuva Manu and the great activities they performed. So this is very interesting here how you look at the verses we covered just the last few days with Vidura and Maitreya. Vidura, he had this proper mood of approach, and because he had this submissive and enthusiastic desire to hear about the pastimes of Krishna's devotees, this inspired Maitreya to want to speak more. And we see that this is also explained in the fourth chapter of the Gita, where Krishna says to Arjuna, Tadvidi pratipatena pariprasnena sevaya upadekshante ganam jnananas tattvadarshana. He talks about the process of inquiry and how to understand the absolute truth. And he says, approach someone who's qualified. That's the first thing. It's like, if you're going to ask someone about spiritual knowledge, it's just like, if you've got some problem with the electric light, you don't go and ask the gardener to fix it. You get a qualified person, an electrician, especially in a country like Australia. In America, you can get anyone to do it because it's only 110 volts, but here in Australia with 240 volts, you get electrocuted, you're going to die. Simple thing. Whereas in America, I remember getting electrocuted there one time. It was like, it's a bit of a jolt, but doesn't really affect you that much. But 240 is quite severe. So in Australia, you need a qualified electrician to deal with it. Otherwise, you can have all sorts of problems. So in the same, and we see, for medicine, we go to a qualified doctor. For all these things, we find a qualified person. Yet, interestingly enough, and these are only material sciences, and they're important while we're here in this material world, but they're not that important. Whereas, spiritual life is a science. And to understand spiritual science, you need to approach a spiritual scientist, someone who's qualified. Because if you approach someone who's not qualified, you'll become confused. And we see this so prevalent in this age that people are completely confused about what is the goal of life. What do we have this human form of life for? And we see that Sanatana Goswami, when he approached Lord Caitanya, this is the first thing he said, Kayami, who am I? He said, I don't understand who I am, so please enlighten me. So he approached the qualified person and he asked the appropriate question. But not only did he ask the appropriate question, he asked the appropriate question with the appropriate attitude. He submitted himself. And in order to understand, a transcendental science, as Krishna explains in the Gita, and as we see is being demonstrated here, one needs to have the approach to the qualified person and to have the appropriate attitude. Otherwise, what will happen is if you don't approach a qualified person, that they'll just fill your head with all sorts of nonsense, and you won't actually understand who I am, what is the goal of life. Because you see that people in this age, they speculate so many conclusions about who they are, what is the goal of life. This body, it's temporary, and this body is all in all. So when the body dies, I die. They don't have any concept beyond the body. But spiritual knowledge teaches us that you're not this body, you're eternal spirit soul. It's very, very different. We're actually eternal. So this body is a temporary thing, and after this body we'll get another body. And the living entity, being eternal, just goes from one body to the next, to the next, to the next. But most people don't understand the process of the transmigration of the soul. But through approaching a spiritual guide, a qualified spiritual guide, with the appropriate mood of approach, then one becomes enlightened. And we see this is what's happening here with Vidura and Maitreya, how Maitreya, because of Vidura's eagerness, but also his submissiveness, then Maitreya he's getting so much enthusiasm, and he's just going deeper and deeper and deeper into these topics. And we see the same is there with Shaunaka Rishi and Sutta Goswami, how he was very Sutta Goswami was very inspired by the inquiries of Shaunaka Rishi, so he just went deeper and deeper into these topics. Same is there with Parikshit and Shukadev Goswami. Because Parikshit had this appropriate mood where he was approaching Shukadev Goswami with the right attitude. Shukadev Goswami was inspired to go into deeper and deeper topics in the Bhagavatam and to discuss more and more about the pastimes of Krishna. And this is, Prabhupada points this out in one of the purports here, that this is how one achieves success in spiritual life, is through hearing. But the way to get the benefit of hearing is by serving devotees, or the way to actually develop the affinity for hearing. As we see, it's described, there's Vasudeva Katha Ruchi, it describes in the second chapter of the first canto, how by serving great souls, then one develops this affinity for the messages of Vasudeva. So we see this is being demonstrated very nicely here in this section of the Bhagavatam. There's no purport on this verse, but we'll read the next verse. Tameka sava bhutanam janmakrid ritida pita tatapina prajanam te sushusha kenava bhavet. You are the father of all living entities and the source of their subsistence, because they are all born of you. Please order us how we may be able to render service to you. Purport. A son's duty is not only to make the father the source of supply for all his needs, but also, when he is grown up, to render service to him. That is the law of creation, beginning from the time of Brahma. A father's duty is to bring up the son until he is grown, and when the son is grown up, it is his duty to render service unto the father. So it must be quite a refreshing change for Brahma, because he had the Kumaras. The Kumaras, they didn't want to procreate. Lord Shiva was he's just such a greatly advanced transcendentalist. He's just in a completely different dimension from the ordinary progenitors, and so we see here now that Swayambhuva Manu, he's just humbly submitting. What do you want us to do? We'll do anything you ask. And so then Brahma, he asks three things of him. I don't remember the three things. It's like, one is to obviously to produce population of the same quality as you and your good wife, and then also to protect them. The two things I can remember. There's a third one, I can't remember what it is. Anyhow, that comes up in the upcoming verses. But we see here, it's very much, and this is very much what this section is about, or helping us to understand is Vedic culture. We see like in modern so-called culture, I remember a joke I heard years ago. I can get away with saying it because where I'm born. But there's this joke I heard years ago. What's the difference between an Australian and a cup of yogurt? Yeah, yogurt's got culture. So they say that in Australia people don't have culture. And of course, I mean, I remember there's a song when I was growing up as a kid, and like they were it's like football, meat pies, kangaroos, and Holden cars. That's like, the Australian culture. And it seems like people are very much proud of this culture, and they advertise it all over the world. And, I mean, it's portrayed in the movies that, like Australians are like beer-swilling kind of, misogynistic and all this kind of stuff, They're proud of it. But actually, if you look at it in terms of a cultured society, such as the Vedic culture, these are considered to be very, very base qualities. To be engaged in intoxication, meat eating, illicit sex, gambling. These are very, very base qualities. And in Kali Yuga, it's the background. Everyone, practically speaking, is engaged in these base qualities. But in a cultured society, because the focus of a materialistic society is one thing, sense gratification. How can I enjoy? How can I enhance my situation in this material world? But in a cultured society, the focus is completely different. In a cultured society, the focus is how to serve ultimately the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but also superiors, advanced devotees, things like that. It's very much focused on respect, humility, service, a very, very different mood. And just like you saw with David and Bobby's two children before. The young boy, he comes up and gives me the garland, and the young girl, there's flower petals on the ground, so she comes up and picks up the flower petals. Service mood is there. And this is really important. If we are to learn the spiritual path, just like, I was quoting that verse before from the 4th chapter of the Gita, what is it? Pariprashena sevaya. So this point of sevaya, you can't learn knowledge from someone with a challenging mood, because usually if you challenge someone, they're not interested in imparting knowledge to you. They just finish up as quick. Oh, I don't like talking with this person. Finish up as quick as they can and go on to something else. But if someone has a submissive mood and is genuinely interested in the topic, genuinely interested to try to find out, who am I? What's the goal of life? What am I meant to be doing? What's my duty? As we see with Parikshit, when he approached Shukadev Goswami, he said, what is the duty of someone who's about to die? He wanted to know, he genuinely wanted to know, what should he do? Because he knew he was going to die. And so he had this submissive mood. But if one doesn't have a submissive mood or a submissive attitude, then it's very difficult to find out what is transcendental knowledge, because the person who has the knowledge is less inclined to impart that knowledge. So it's a very, very important point that's being brought out here, especially we see with Vidura when he's talking to Maitreya, and now we see how Manu, Swayambhuva Manu, is approaching Lord Brahma. And there's so much love and respect also. We see there's deep affection between the parents and the children, or between the teacher and the disciple. And you also see in this day and age, this is very much lacking. It's very much, like in the relationship between the guru and disciple, you'll often find that, when someone gets to the point where they think they can become guru, then they reject their guru. There's no love there. Whereas we see, you look at the example of Dhruva Maharaj, for instance, when at the end of his life, a flower airplane came to take him back to the spiritual world, and then his immediate thought was for his mother, because his mother had guided him in spiritual life. She'd guided him to go to the forest where he met his guru, Narad Muni, and so immediately she was thinking, no, but I can't go without my mother. And then so that the Vishnu Dusas, they said, look ahead, and he saw that she was also heading back to the spiritual world. And another brilliant example of this like a superior with his dutiful nature towards the inferior. There's a really interesting story. I was trying to think of a story I could tell there, because it's always good to have stories in the Bhagavatam class. But there's a really interesting story that's spoken in some versions of the Mahabharata. So I'm not sure if it's completely acceptable, but it seems that it's spoken in some versions of the Mahabharata. So, but what happened was it's different from the Bhagavatam description. That much I can say. But in one version of the Mahabharata describes how when Yudhisthira and the Pandavas, when they retired from the kingdom and they were preparing to go back to Godhead, they went on a northern journey, all of them. And as they were traveling one after the other, his wife and his brothers fell down and died. And when each person was dying, I think Bhishma was the last. No, Arjuna was the last, yeah. But Bhishma was asking what happened here, what happened there, and so Yudhisthira was describing. But there's this dog that was always following along with them, and always stayed at Yudhisthira's heels and just kept with him no matter what was happening. And as they were going further and further north, the journey became more difficult. And so then it got to the point where there was only Yudhisthira and the dog. And then Indra came down to take Yudhisthira to the heavenly planets. And there was only accommodation for Yudhisthira, not for the dog. And Yudhisthira said, I can't go without the dog. He's been faithful, he's been loyal. And Indra explains, he said, but there's no place for dogs in the heavenly planets. And he said, then I'm not going to go. This dog's been loyal to me. I'm going to, he's taken shelter of me, so I'm going to give him protection under all circumstances. And at that point, the dog mystically transformed himself into Dharmaraj, who is Yudhisthira's father, and explained that actually I was just testing your qualities here to see. And so I'm very impressed. And actually, there's no one in the material creation or in the heavenly planets even who has these qualities like you have, because he was so dutiful and so compassionate to those who were under his care that he would look after them no matter what. So we can see this is the nature of a person who has good qualities, is they will look after their, those persons who are in their charge. And not just, because sometimes we see, it happens quite often in the modern age or in the material world, that when someone has dominion or responsibility for another person, they tend to exploit. They tend to see what they can, get out of that person. But rather, someone who actually has a proper understanding of what is the role or what is their duty will see that their duty is to nourish that person so they can develop their God consciousness. Because ultimately, this is the duty of someone who's in the position of a superior, is to give someone God consciousness. And there's a verse in the 5th canto, 5.5.18, I think it is, maybe it's 12, I think it's 18, where it says, Guruna sa sa sajano sa pitina sa janani sa. And I don't remember all the words there, and it says, Daivim samapetam mitum. It talks about how that one should not become a guru, a father, a mother, a husband, a worshipful demigod, basically any type of leadership position, unless you're capable of delivering your dependents from the cycle of birth and death. So this is, with a cultured society, the whole society is focusing on how to end this material existence and go back to the spiritual realm, how to develop our God consciousness. This is the point of Varnashram. Varnashram is not just about, placing people according to guna and karma so they can have a peaceful life and enjoy themselves. The ultimate purpose of Daivi Varnashram is to awaken people's Krishna consciousness, so they can actually understand who they are. They can understand that actually my position is a servant of God. And the whole society is structured in such a way. The whole Varnashram society is structured in a way that people will ultimately understand who they are and what is their duty. But you see in material life it's not like that. So it's a very interesting discussion here. And let me see. And you talk about due respect. And the interesting thing is also, we'll see in the, I think it's the 12th canto, 2nd chapter, at the beginning of the chapter, it talks about Kali Yuga and the adverse qualities that are manifesting in Kali Yuga. And there we see how it's describing how these things like duty, respect, all these various qualities actually come from religiousness. So if people are not religious, ultimately they cannot develop these qualities. And there's a really interesting verse. I've forgotten the verse, but I understand the basic Sanskrit of it, the translation of it. That Prahlad, I think it's Prahlad Maharaj speaking. That he talks about how, for one who's surrendered to Krishna, then all the good qualities of the demigods manifest. But if one is not a devotee of Krishna, how can they have any good qualities? Even if they're adept at the practice of mystic yoga or the honest endeavor of maintaining their family and relatives, they're driven by their own mental speculations. And this is the thing, when someone takes shelter of an authorized religious tradition or a bona fide religious tradition, they follow the scriptures of that tradition. The scriptures then guide them on what it means to be a human being, what it means to have qualities, what it means to follow a religious path. Whereas we see in this day and age that, you look at things like social media and you have these people called influencers, and they're doing all sorts of they influence people in various ways, but ultimately they're influencing them to take up bad qualities because they're doing things that people want to do, but they're a little bit shy or maybe ashamed or whatever. They don't really want to do it, but when they see someone doing it on social media, oh great, I can go out and do this too. But usually you see with these people that are influencers is they drive people to do things that are not ultimately in their best interests. So, I mean, maybe this is something that devotees need to look at, is how to become an influencer on social media so that we can influence people to take up good qualities. Because ultimately this is the mission of the Krishna consciousness movement, is to bring people to the point of understanding who they are, what is their duty, and what is the goal of life. And so if we can do that through whatever means, then we're being successful. But we'll see that what's happening in this age is that people are influenced by others who don't understand what their goal of life is, don't understand what their duty as a human being is, and don't even understand they're not the material body. They don't understand that they're servants of Krishna. Therefore, they're influencing people to take up these base qualities and also to degrade themselves in this material world. So this is the background of what we're faced with. But by this process of hearing, by hearing from authorized persons with appropriate attitude, then one can actually understand what is our duty, what is the goal of life, who I am. These are the important things. And this way we can ultimately come to the point of becoming inspired on the spiritual path and then also inspiring others in the spiritual path. It's about any comments or questions on that?
Hare Krishna. It's just an observation, with that point that you just brought up about how, online influencers, they do things that other people might be ashamed to do, and they kind of broadcast it out loud. And it makes me understand how the degradation of Kali Yuga is continuing, because things like, in the 90s, I remember if anyone had plastic surgery, it was kept under wraps. The doctors wouldn't admit that they're plastic surgeons, and it was this big scandal if someone was presumed to have had plastic surgery. Whereas now, on social media, it's like every other ad is a plastic surgery ad, and all the celebrities are very open about who their doctor is. And so it's very interesting how when we air out these bad qualities, in the beginning there's like a scandal over it and a lot of attention drawn to it, but then that desensitization kind of happens, and then from there it just becomes no longer shocking and just the normal, and that's how we keep progressing further into those negative qualities.
Yeah, so just imagine what it's going to be like in a few thousand years.
Hare Krishna.
Don't be around to find out. Yeah. And we see this, but ultimately this is coming through to irreligiosity. Because, in the nature of this age, like previous ages, religiosity was much more prominent. Especially in Satya Yuga, religiosity was very prominent. And this is the age that's being spoken about here, is Satya Yuga. And as the ages progress, then gradually the pillars of religion are disappearing. And we'll see in this age, truthfulness is left to some extent, but not much, and it's diminishing. Just like I was having a conversation with a devotee about this yesterday, and it's quite remarkable how much of this content you see on social media, or not even just social media, but even in the news, is just outright lies. You get these these news companies, agencies, whatever. For instance, they may have a particular political agenda. So, like either in Australia, you've only got two parties, Liberal, Labor. So they might be one news agency might be, Party A, for instance. I mean, I don't really care about politics. It's pretty, stupid stuff. And therefore, if this news agency is Party B, they'll say bad things about the other party just because it pushes their political agenda. And oftentimes what you see, what they're presenting, is just not true. It's fabricated, completely fabricated. And you'll see the same with a lot of this stuff on social media. It's just not true. It's just completely fabricated because why? It brings attention to their social media account, and they get more hits and they get more followers. And this is what it's all about, is having lots and lots of followers. But okay, you've got followers. What's your qualification to deliver those followers from the path of birth and death? Nothing. So why are you doing this? And what happens is because they're leading people on an irreligious path, that they get implicated by this. That deepens their karmic entanglement. Whereas someone who focuses on giving God consciousness to people actually becomes dear to Krishna. And Krishna says, Priyame Caritamrita at the end of the Gita. He says, there's no person in this world who's more dear to me than that person who's delivering the message of Godhead. So this is the proper use of social media, to use social media for giving Krishna consciousness to people. Not for filling their heads full of nonsense and just lying about this thing and that thing to push your agenda. And that's one of the big challenges in this age, the so-called information age, is how much of that information is true. A very, very small percentage. Just like, you go online, you want to buy a product. You go online and you read the blurb about the product. This product can do this and this product can do that. It'll stop your hair from falling out. It'll make you grow new teeth. You'll become 20 years younger, and all this type of stuff. And it's so common. They're just making it up. Especially in certain countries where they don't, like in Australia to some extent, if people lie about their product, they can get in a lot of trouble. And you'll see, like when you buy certain types of things, this product may help you. They can get away with it by saying stuff like that. But as soon as they say this product will, then they can face legal repercussions. And this is just the nature of the age. So we have to be very, very careful. User beware. Use it your own peril in this age. Because it's just full of as it's the sages of Nrisimha they describe in the beginning of the Bhagavatam. This praying up the men in this age, they're quarrelsome, they're lazy, they're unlucky, they're misguided, and they're always disturbed. That's the background we're faced with in this age. So, for someone who's trying to find their way through this material world and trying to find their way out of this material world, user discretion is advised. You'll be very, very careful in this age because it's very difficult to find the truth. And you'll see there's so many so-called spiritualists who are presenting themselves as being very knowledgeable in the spiritual path, but actually they're misleading people. And all they do is they take themselves down to hell, but they also take their followers to hell. I mean, there's been so many prominent examples like this. I mean, just one of the most prominent examples I can think of was Jim Jones. Because when I was growing up, that was really big. I don't know if everyone is aware of that. I'm sure Prabhu remembers. But there's this guy called Jim Jones. He was an evangelistic television preacher in the US, And he wound up having millions and millions of followers. But the US government was onto him because he was a charlatan. He was just cheating people for money. And what happened is they fled to somewhere in South America. Him and tens of thousands of his followers, they went to South America. They bought this land and they built what they call Jonestown. And the US government was closing in on them. And they were actually they were about to raid the place. You know, they worked out some deal with the local government. They're about to raid the place and arrest Jim Jones and all his followers and stuff like that. So what happened was, because they were promising things like, you follow Jim Jones, you'll go to, they were talking about this like heaven they'd go to and you'll be able to enjoy forever and stuff like that. And then so what wound up happening was when they found out that the US government was going to come and raid the place and arrest them all, he gave them all this drink, which was basically lemonade with cyanide in it. And they all drank the thing, and he was saying, but you drink this and you'll go back to the promised land. I mean, that's Kali Yuga. That's just Kali Yuga, and so you have to be... They all drank it, yeah. It was very famous, They all drank it, and thousands... And when the authorities got there was just dead bodies everywhere. Thousands and thousands of dead people all over the place. And but this is the background of Kali Yuga, and there's so many cheaters out there. And so one has to be very, very careful when approaching and someone to guide them. And this we see in the scriptures, they help us to understand who is a qualified person. Just like Upadeshamrita is Vachavegam, Manasakodavegam, Jivavegam. So they can control the mind's demands, the actions of anger, the tongue, belly, genitals. They control, and this says Prithiviyam Sasyasya. They're qualified to take disciples all over the world. So we need to study the scriptures, understand who is qualified, who is not qualified, and follow that qualified person. Otherwise, we'll just be swallowed up by Kali Yuga. Like a big Timangala fish swallowing up whales. Anything else? Srimad Prabhu.
We've brought up this topic previously, but we sometimes speculate how this planet became populated. And I was wondering, with your knowledge or readings, if you've come across how that occurs on this planet, how it becomes populated.
How this planet became populated?
Yeah.
This is going to be described in this chapter. Because what happens is Brahma has signed Manu the duty of populating the planet, and then he says, then I think maybe about verse 16, he says, but the planet's down here in the bottom of the ocean. So can you, with the help of God, lift the planet up out of the ocean? And then so they did, because he's saying this is the place where all the people have got to reside. So then he lifted the planet up from the ocean, and then, by producing his children, Priyavrata, Tanapada, and the three daughters, then through them, the population was generated. I'm not sure if that's answering your question, though.
Not just the human population, but there's all the other creatures.
Sorry?
All the other creatures.
Yeah, I mean...
Because the materialistic narrative is very different than what we say.
Yeah, but like from Kashyapa, there came... Because Kashyapa had 2 wives, I think, sisters. There was Kadru and Vinita. I think that's Kashyapa, yeah? No? David was Kadama. Yeah, so Kashyapa was one of the Prajapatis, and he produced birds and things like that, so I mean, because we look at, like, people, and we see the limitations of people these days, but if you go back in the previous ages, some of these progenitors were very extraordinarily powerful, and they were able to produce different species. I think from Vinita, I may have this the wrong way around, from Vinita came...
The Diti and Aditi that were the wives of Kashyapa.
But
They produce many of the snakes and insects and birds and things.
No,
Many of those
because Vinita was the mother of Garuda, and Kadra was the mother of the snakes, or it was the other way around. I can't remember that. But so they produced a race of, one of them produced a race of birds, the other one produced a race of snakes, and deity and aditi, they produced the Devatas and the Daityas, and the Asuras. So you see all these different personalities produce so many different species. But they had that capacity. And I was reading something really interesting this morning. It's in the Caitanya Caritamrita, I think it was the 4th chapter of the Adi Leela, and it was talking about how Krishna manifests in all species of life, and he said it's really difficult for the human mind to understand that. And he said, but the Lord reveals himself to people according to their capacity to understand. So you'll see in different species that Krishna manifests in different ways, and the living entities in that species can understand that to some extent. So in the same way, like according to their capacity, you'll see various incarnations appear. So, persons of greater capacity are able to perceive Krishna more than, say, for instance, we can. And also, persons of greater capacity can produce species that, human beings can't, like ordinary human beings in this day and age can't. But previously we see these persons who had human form produced, so many different types of living entities. All very interesting. Okay, thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki, Samaveta Bhaktivinoda ki, Jai Nitai Ho.